Hello, and welcome to a very unofficial Circle Meets Square, where we're going to be talking about the Netflix series, McMahon, which I begrudgingly watched because Nick made me watch it so we can talk about it. Hi,
Oh, come
I'm
on.
Arnoux. I'm the head of design at DWRPG. I'm joined by Nick.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Yeah, it's me, Nick. I'm back again, and yeah, we got some stuff to talk about this series. Wow. Um, yeah, I don't
I
know
don't
if
know.
yeah, you
Yeah, I don't
go.
know where you want to jump in. We've got 6 episodes to
Mm-hmm.
cover.
I'd
Do you
like
want
to.
to do
I'd
this
like to start
chronologically at the
off.
beginning or what?
Yeah, I think like maybe we go with episode by episode as they released, and then kind of do maybe an overall at the end there. But I wanted to start with a question for you, Arno. Um,
Sure.
Did you learn something while watching this? I know it
Something
sounds
of
weird.
substance or just obscure facts?
Yeah, a little bit of obscure facts potentially, or
I
like,
mean, sure. I guess I learned obscure facts. I learned what Bret Hart looks like.
because like there was a
I learned
lot
what Miss
of
McMahon's voice sounds like, I
there
guess.
there was a lot of when the series was like being promoted and everything. I saw on like sort of wrestling Twitter, but also like certain podcasts and such saying sort of maybe even hyping up a little bit, and maybe this was also in the trailers for it, that this was going to be like a like a hit piece on Vince McMahon. And
Yeah,
I
well,
was
they
like,
talked
oh,
about how they
okay.
had to pivot, and they're like, yes, we're going to make it a hit piece. And
Yeah.
that's why afterwards, remember, you're like, let's watch this series. And I'm like, Nick, I'll watch it, but I'm just going to tell you, I heard the reviews were that it's really disappointing and
Yeah.
not at all, like, not
I
at all
will.
what you want it to be.
Yeah, it's the thing of I feel like the final episode sort of does it. But all the other episodes really was just I kept turning to my wife while we were watching this and going, "This is stuff that I've already known about or like have experienced while watching WWE my entire life." You know?
Mhm.
Like I was in it with like all of the like NWO and like the Attitude Era and all that sort of stuff I already pretty much knew. So I was really just wondering. There was one aspect of this that I didn't know, mostly because it was like back in the golden era. But I just wanted to know from like your side of things. Was this like were you like, oh, this is interesting. Now I actually get to learn a little bit more about what the Attitude Era was and what was it
Well,
like coming
let's
up
be
and stuff like
clear.
that.
Learning something and finding it interesting are two different things.
Okay.
I certainly learned a lot of facts. I'm sorry to say this really harsh. I don't know if you really liked this series or not, but I did walk away from this series thinking, what a waste of time.
Yeah, it. It was a little bit like that for me. I feel like the first episode and the last episode really were good points, and
I
then
didn't
like
think they really were good
and
points.
then like the rest of the stuff, I was like, well, again, like going back to it, I was like, I already know about the NWO. I already know about the Attitude Era. I already know about
Well, you have to
literally
remember the
all this other
context of
stuff.
you have to remember the context. This wasn't supposed to be a hit piece. This was supposed to be about Vince McMahon's success. But because in the middle of the filming, all of the allegations against him, which if you're unfamiliar, people at home, probably not, but if you are, Vince McMahon, it came out that he did all of this sexual harassment and he pressured people into doing sexual acts in return for their jobs, and there were people who testified as such and all of these things, and he ended up stepping down. And that happened while they were making this series, and they were effectively forced to pivot because they were going to tell the story of a man who made it through despite all these fake allegations against him, and at the last minute had to pivot to, wait, they're true? I
Yeah, yeah.
can't believe it. The man has been sued for sexually harassing and assaulting people 6 times. But you're telling me that all of these times they actually happened? Wow. What a surprise.
Yeah. I think
Um
this, like, I feel like a documentary usually has, like, one question that they're really trying to, like, get answered by the end of it. And I felt like through,
mhm.
like, the promo that we saw um,
I
of this
didn't see a
documentary,
promo.
the question was, is there a difference between Vince McMahon, the person, and Mr. McMahon, the character? There was a lot of, like, that
No, there
question.
isn't.
And, like, yeah, to me,
No,
and I
let
feel
me
like
answer it
everybody
to
who,
you. There is not.
yeah, to everybody who already knows of, like, what this guy's all about, we didn't really feel like, I was like, of course, no, there's no difference between this man. But then it just, the other slight, like, uh, undertone of this, I also felt like, was like, trauma always comes in like a cycle, which we could start with episode 1, which I thought was potentially going to be
Junior
the most
was the name of
interesting.
the episode.
Yeah, I was really interested in this because there was an aspect of Vince McMahon lore, I guess, if you want to call it that, that I never really knew. I didn't really get to know a lot. We
Like
never
too many video games
Yeah, I
throwing
never.
around lore.
Yeah. I never really got to know a lot about, what was Vince McMahon like beforehand.
Surprise, Nick. Neither did he.
Yeah. And there was a couple of things that was like a little shocking to me. The fact that they just sort of like brushed under the rug, sort of. The fact that he was like abused by his stepfather and all that. I
I
was
didn't think
like,
they
I,
brushed that under the rug. I think that
I
was
was like,
pretty prominent.
yeah, but I was like, why did it just felt like in episode 1 he talks about it, and it's just really him talking about it, and then nobody really, there's none of the
It's
other
a
talking heads that come
documentary. Who
in.
else would be talking about
Yeah,
it,
well, but
Nick?
like they got all these like talking heads, and I figured like maybe one of them would also like be like, yeah, this was like a bad time in his life, and there was a little bit of that, but there wasn't
How?
like,
He was 10 years old. They weren't there. Nobody was.
yeah, it was
The
just,
only people who could tell us what his life was like at that point are Vince and dead people.
yeah, I
Because there
guess
were
so,
only
yeah.
2 people involved, or 3 people involved: Vince, his mother, and his stepfather. Crucially, his father wasn't involved. And why? Vince apparently, so he claims, doesn't even know. He went, yeah, at 12, my dad showed up, took me out of that hellhole. And he went, I never really asked him why. It never came up. I wanted to know, but it seemed like a topic we weren't going to discuss. And then to fast forward in the series, he died.
Yeah,
Vince's father
yeah,
passed
yeah.
away.
I
And
thought
he
it was,
never, supposedly, according to Vince, never asked why he wasn't in his life. So if
yeah.
that's true, taking that at surface level, even Vince doesn't know. Nobody does. The mom, the dad, the stepfather, they're all dead. So Vince is the only one who can talk about what his life was, from 11 years old and younger.
Yeah, it was it was just something where I was like, wow, we're not really gonna give more context, or he doesn't really. I mean, I get it. Maybe he just doesn't want to talk about it, which is
What do you mean? The whole
surprising.
series was about it, Nick.
I don't feel like that was part. Like it wasn't brought up like every episode. Well, especially the stuff
Yes,
about
because
his
the
dad and
series
stuff.
doesn't expect you to be
Sure.
5 years old.
Yeah, but
Uh,
like the
he
series as
they
well
talked
wasn't
about
really.
he went through a bunch of physical abuse, and then episodes 2 and 3 were about all this physical abuse he put other people through, and then episode 1 talked about all this, a little bit of
Yeah,
incest and sexual abuse that happened in his life, and then episodes 4 through 6 are all about all this sexual abuse. Well, I guess 5 and 6 mostly. 5 and 6 are about all this sexual abuse he did. The whole series was about the
I
effects
guess
of his
so. Yeah,
childhood, I
yeah.
felt.
Because it was a thing that I was gonna touch on when we hit episode 6, but realistically, I felt like um,
We're
the
really
sort of
not going to
stuff
go
that like
episode by episode at all.
so like I feel like one of the great talking heads that I liked, and my wife liked, while we were watching this, was Tony Atlas. I felt like he was a guy that just sort of didn't really care about, like, he just was going to tell. You gave him a question, and he was going to tell you the exact answer of what was happening. He didn't care about the, like, politics of it all, like I feel like Hogan did, and even some other people. Like, I feel like there was parts of it that I also felt like Brett was sort of lost the sauce there. But I felt like that the whole idea that, like, Vince's dad wasn't there for 12 years, and it starts with, like, Vince, like, going out to find him, and then uh falls in love, I guess, with
He
this,
didn't
like,
go out to find him. His dad picked him up.
oh, was it? I thought he said
Yes, no, he said his dad rolled up one day when he was 12 and he ran out and like gave him a hug and he's like, "Hey son." And he doesn't talk about the specifics of what happens after that. He goes, "But then my dad brought me into his world."
yeah. And I thought that was very interesting because, like, he then goes on to sort of say that, like, how, his dad pretty much was, like, pretty shouldering him, I feel like, with about, like,
Yeah.
giving his son this business and, like, forcing him to, like, pretty much be like, you want to be in this business, I'll give you a part of the territories that I run, and if it does well, we'll see. And then he was like, well, it did well. You, like, in that weird contract that he signed with his dad, where he was like paying off his dad and everything like that, and it really echoed to me further on in the series, where I think it's like episode 5 or 6,
Five is
where,
family business.
yeah, where Shane was like starting to get that feeling, seemingly, of like, I think I can run this. And there was that little bit of like, I might be able to run this a little bit better than you. And I think it was Paul Heyman who told the story of Vince giving Shane a knife and,
Yeah.
like, exposing his chest and be like,
The
do
false
it.
dichotomy.
Yeah, do it, because that's the only way you're gonna ever
The move of machismo everywhere.
Yeah, and it was like, wow. And I felt bad. If anything, this makes me feel bad about, like, Shane and Stephanie in general, about, like, because it felt like to me that
I won't go into it, but is it crazy to you that I have a real life story that's exactly like that?
I can't wait to hear about that off cam.
Yeah.
But, like,
I've actually told you it twice, but
because, like,
anyways.
there's a scene in, like, after WrestleMania 40, I think, that they showed with, like, Shane going up against The Undertaker, and Shane goes up in the back and he gives his father a hug about it and everything. And I was watching it and I was like, this is clearly, like, Shane is a guy who, like, wants the respect of his father. Similarly to what with Vince, always trying to get respect from his father, but his father never really showed it, seemingly. And the same thing, you can literally see that with this hug of, like, Shane, they say, is, like, the more nicer McMahon and, like, all that, but, like, he's hugging his dad, and it feels like on Shane's side, it feels like a real, like, bring it in, dad type hug. But you look at Vince and he's like a robot.
And his face is just stern.
Yeah.
That was so funny when I saw that. It's like, yes, robot Vince, uncertain what to do with this emotion called love.
Yeah, and it was just like, to me, I was like, man, it is like a cycle. Because this is a man whose dad wasn't there, comes up randomly in his life, takes him away from, like, the craziness that was going on. And for a very long time, he tries to get this acknowledgement. And he even says in this that the only time his dad ever said that he loved him or that he was proud of him was, like, before he died. And I was like, God, that's... I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be the same thing for him as well, to his kids.
Well, he was nicer to Shane than his father was to him, but... He didn't abandon him for 12 years in a trailer park.
That's true. That's true.
Right? But still, yeah, no, he was, he was raised by his father. Once
Mhm.
again, another incredible revelation from the Netflix series McMahon.
Um, to get back to episode 1, Junior, I think this was a lot of this, a lot of what I have notes on, and a little bit of like episode 2 was a lot of when Vince was coming in and like he had all these plans of taking the territories. I have in here, what happened, Vince? Like, why did you stop growing the business, you old man? Because I felt like back then he was a young gun, he wanted to make his name, and he was doing a lot of things that was changing the business for some to think maybe better. I mean, look at where it is now. And as we talked before this podcast, there really isn't a lot of history to be said about the pre-territory days. Like, there's
Yeah.
definitely, it's there, but we can't find it in a simple Google search. And it is sort of like he comes onto the scene and is like, I'm gonna buy out all these territories. I'm gonna have all these guys wrestlers. We're all gonna just become one whole thing. And, you know, dear old dad is over there being like, I don't think this is a great idea, son. And Vince McMahon is like, well, I'm doing this and you either get on board or I don't need you, making it sound like. And I thought that was like an interesting, because I don't really like the territories era is like something that's like I said before, a vague timeline. It's only, I don't even know how many guys we have left to even give us the full story of what was going on, you know. Um, that's my little diatribe on episode 1, Arno. But what are you thinking?
I, I don't know how many intricate thoughts I really have. I'll be honest on most of these episodes. I think Junior is important because, in contrast to, of course, later in Family Business, he's very much like, I can steal from anyone I want. I'm Vince McMahon. It's not like we have a contract or anything. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. And then as soon as people start doing it to him throughout the series,
Yeah.
he's like, how
How
dare
dare
they?
they? The
When I did it was fine, but when
hypocrisy.
they did it, it was wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
then they're like, what's the difference, Vince? He goes, well, there's not really any difference at all. And they're like, but you just said the way they did it was wrong. He's like, yeah, well, I say things all the time that I lie about. And it's like, what a guy.
Yeah, that
What a
whole
guy.
scene, I was like,
Literally just went,
this is
yeah, but
all you
I make
need.
shit up all the
Yeah,
time.
I was
It's
like,
like, yeah,
this one
great.
line is all you need for this entire documentary. Is like him being
Yeah.
like, there's a little part of it that I was like, oh, okay, this is where like the businessman aspect of you
Well,
comes out, because he was like, I say things all the time because pretty much he was like, say crazy things all the time, and maybe I don't even believe them half the time because I want to control the narrative that comes out first. And I was like, that is an interesting thing for you to say in this current timeline of your life here, you know?
yeah. I don't know. It's one of those things. I'm trying to think of another thing. Throughout the series, in every episode, there was something like this, where Vince McMahon would say a thing, and then they would smash cut to it
Yeah.
being a lie.
Yeah.
And they're just like, it's not like we ever, I don't know
I
why
love
they
that.
gave us such a high rating. It's not like we did it right. It's not like we ever had guns on the show,
Yeah,
cut to guns
that
on
was
the
my
show. It's not that
favorite.
we ever we never really like threw anyone like through any hard service. Like, what do you mean? That's the whole show.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
You do that all the time. He's like, we never had like nudity or anything. Cuts to
Cuts to
all of these
nudity, yeah.
women, just tits out. It's like, what are
I
you
will,
saying?
but it's crazy to me because like
He's
they
like,
talk.
I never. This is the thing as well. Vince McMahon, asserted at the beginning. He literally asserted every point possible when they asked him, "What's the difference between Mr. McMahon and yourself, Vince?" And I just want to be clear that throughout this series, he defended every point every possible perspective standpoint. There was a point where he said, I'm nothing like the character. There's a point where he said, the character really is just me. And then there was a point where he said, yeah, the character's me, but exaggerated. Or maybe I'm an exaggerated version of the character, which just hold that for a moment.
Yeah.
What could that possibly mean?
I think...
Does that make any sense to anyone? Maybe Vince is the exaggerated version of Mr. McMahon. It's like, no.
I think it's just you, my man. Yeah. I think it's
I don't think that's... makes any sense. And then finally, at the end, he goes, I don't know. Right? And so this is not a great anchor for whether he is Mr. McMahon or not. But everyone else was like, oh, it's definitely him.
Yeah,
Everybody was very stern. There were some people who went with some exaggeration.
Yeah.
Most people were like, it's definitely him.
But and even like his second in command.
I yell at people. Vince goes, I yell at people in the ring. I do it all the time, but I never yell at people backstage.
And then Bruce, oh my Bruce gosh, Pritchard is exactly. Like, no, that is exactly what happened. One of the other
crazy,
interesting and like baffling things to me about McMahon, and it's brought up a couple of times in this, where it's especially brought in like near the last episode where everybody's like, we see him as a father figure. We do anything for like Vince McMahon, like even calling back to episode 1 when Vince came into the locker room after that reporter was bugging him essentially and was like, would be really nice if somebody hit him. And like a guy hit him. Pretty much Vince has got like this little mob of people that he can control. And I never understood why. Like everybody is like, most people are like, he's a father figure for me, and I do anything for him. And it's like, but it's, who you're saying this about, right? Like, I'm not crazy here.
And this is most telling in Family Business, episode 5. Let me go over the 3 episodes, Heat, Screwjob, and Attitude, in one small little bit, okay?
Yeah.
Heat, Screwjob, and Attitude are about the fact that there is a wrestling federation that needs to become the WWE, and Vince is really mean to all the wrestlers, and they love it. That's it. That's the summary of those 3 episodes.
Yeah.
Nothing else real important.
It's pretty much
Mr.
like
McMahon happens.
It's the unfortunate.
A lot of stuff they talk about, Hulk and Hulk Hogan and things like that, and and John Cena.
If everybody's heard about the WCW WWE war, it's about that.
They never even mentioned that actually the whole invasion angle storyline.
Yeah.
Did not mention it once, but they did talk about
they talked about the screw job, which it's I get it for a certain audience because this is Netflix.
Hold on, can I finish my point?
Oh yeah, you go for it.
I just need to get like sentences in. And so they said it in Family Business about Vince, and this is really telling because this happens in every single industry. I'm big in a lot of in the TRPG community and the VTubing community, all this stuff. This happens a lot where something horrible has come out about Vince. He's been through all these lawsuits. The big one hasn't dropped yet, but these people are defending him. I can't remember exactly who it was. I think it was Bruce, but I don't remember. But someone's like, look, I've seen the first few episodes of this documentary. I think it's, quite terrible, this documentary you're doing. You're painting Vince McMahon as this horrible person. And he goes, and he's not a horrible person. He's a human being, and you're treating him like he does all these terrible things, but he doesn't. And I would back you if it were true. If it came out that he was a monster, I'd 100% be on board, but he's not a monster. You want to talk about all these lawsuits he got involved with, but when his wife was sick, he paid for his wife's treatment. All of it, he paid for it to be in the nicest place. And he may not have always been nice to me, but he was always fair to me. He was always good to me. And I know that he's a good person. And two things I want to center in there because it is so common. First, if someone is nice to you, that does not mean they're a good person. I hate to break it to you. In whatever industry, in your real life, this is the case too. You may find out that your father is a murderer. I hate to break it to you. It's
Yep.
possible. And you might think to yourself the absurd thought, but he didn't murder me. And the answer is, of course, because you're here. Right? How people treat you does not determine how they treat other people.
Mm-hmm.
People treat people differently. That's a big thing in life. And just because you're not the person being oppressed, it doesn't mean they don't oppress others. The second thing is, of course he was kind to his wife. He loved his wife. How you treat people who are your friends does not determine the quality of person you are. It is how you treat people who are not your friends, how you treat
Yeah,
your
I mean,
enemies, how you treat your associates, how you treat the waiter at the bar where you go to get a snack at happy hour. How you treat the people who mean nothing to you means the most for who your character is. If you are kind to people you think are your family or your friends, and you are monsters to everyone else, you are a monster.
I think it's also pretty damning when they were talking about, I think it was Sable,
Yes.
where they're
Well,
like,
I mean, maybe. They talked about her.
yeah, they were like, she sued you for like millions of dollars, but
Mhm.
for sexual harassment, and then a few months or years maybe down the line, you
Yeah.
rehired her,
Month.
and he was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, she sued me? I don't remember that. She came back to work," and it's like, man, you're like memory sense, like, because it got brought up too at one
He
point.
is an old man, to be clear.
Yeah, but it got brought up at one point. There was a little like slip up where he couldn't remember something correctly, and then you could hear in the background somebody answering it for him effectively,
Yeah.
and that was Heyman. And I was like,
Yes. I was going
oh
to say it was Heyman,
yeah,
yeah.
I was like, how many times was that? Like, was that like a slight dig at how this interview, or multiple interviews, I should say, were going on? Like, how many times did this happen? And it was like, oopsie, we just in the final cut, we accidentally forgot to edit out that part where Heyman had to effectively speak for McMahon, you know?
I don't think it's an oopsie moment
I
that
don't
they
think
left
so
it
either.
in, nor do
No.
they want anyone to believe that.
Yeah.
I I think that they're not trying to pull one over on anyone in this edit. I think they know exactly why you're here and what they're doing.
Yeah. I
This edit was this I have to say something about the series. It was incredibly well put together. It was very well paced. It was very well labeled. The naming scheme was great. All the cuts were fantastic. Everything was on task. It was excellently done.
mhm.
I just personally I guess I didn't hate it. More so I thought it was a waste of time because I felt the subject matter was dry and meaningless. But I also dislike drama as a person. Nick's like a drama
Yeah,
addict.
yeah.
On my side, I don't. When people say things about other people, I just don't care.
Yeah, it was definitely I'm a man of loving about hearing about other people's tea, you know? It's a great little thing for me. But it was like in the broad strokes of this, when I was after the fact watching the whole series, I went, I again, like, to reiterate, there was a lot of stuff in this that me as a pro wrestling fan, I already knew about. But then I go into why potentially part of this was made. I think that realistically, you could probably take episode 1 out and take like episode maybe 5 and 6 out and make that the Mr. McMahon documentary. The like Heat, Screwjob, and Attitude, I think you could just make as a separate documentary, because I see what Netflix
Yeah.
is trying to do, as we know.
I do too. Those episodes were very much about the wrestling industry, which is interesting, but it was undertoned with the things that Vince McMahon was doing at the time, and mostly it was getting sued. I don't
Yeah,
know if you picked that up,
yeah,
but every episode ended with 3 lawsuits.
yeah, yeah. It was very, because like my wife would like see the ending graphic of like, you know, the settlements or
They
whatever.
settled this
Yeah,
when
and
they
then
cut this
she would
out.
she would
They
just
yeah.
Google search like what happened with that, and like just tell me like, yeah, no, that was like for like a crap ton of money that they
Mhm.
settled for. And then like, I mean, talking about, you know, the allegations and everything that was set out, you know, I think, what was it, $7.5 billion he gave to uh one of these women for like hush money. I was like,
I I don't think it's that, but I don't know the number.
I remember 7.5 was something. Maybe it was a collective sum of that was all of them put together. Um, but it's again one of those things where it's like, I think the ending, where I assume the ending of each interview with all these different talking heads, when what do you think Vince's legacy looks like after, you know? And everybody really not being able to give a solid answer for that. And it's one of those things where I feel like I've had this conversation with you, Arno, where I'm like, yeah, he's a bad guy, and
Yeah.
100%, you know, there's no like potential good in that man. Um,
I won't say there's no good in that man. He's a
he's
human being. He loves his wife. He loves his family. Sometimes a little too much, I think.
yeah,
Or,
yeah,
it says something. He was a victim of sexual assault and incest, and he wrote a lot of incest into his plot lines.
yep,
Um, that was or rather, that was also a really horrid but telling moment when it went to Stephanie McMahon and she went, "Oh God," they went, "Can you
there's
tell us
so
about
many
any of the
no's,
like
yeah.
worst plot lines?"
Hmm.
And she goes, "There's some I can't even tell you, they're so bad." They're like, "What was like just give us one." And she's like, "I can't. I know what the worst one is, but there's no way I could bring myself to tell you. We wouldn't want that kind of thing out there." And then it's the flash cut to Vince McMahon going,
To him
"Oh
saying
yeah,
it,
the
yeah,
plot
yeah,
line where she was going to be pregnant and I was going to be the one who knocked her up."
yeah. I thought that was like
And
me.
it
Me and my
says a
wife
lot
turned
that
to each
Stephanie was
other.
like, "We can't let anyone know about this plot line." And Vince was like, "Oh yeah, let me tell you about it."
Yeah,
What
yeah,
a
yeah.
wild and wacky
I
time.
I think also another thing that me and my wife turned our heads and were like, that's such a Vince-ism, was when he was when Stephanie and Triple H were talking about getting married and all that, and Vince was like, "What if we made it a pay-per-view?" And
Yeah, what
Stephanie
if
was
we
like,
made it a
"No,
pay-per-view?
no, we're not making it a pay-per-view. This is gonna be, we're not doing involving the business in that." And then it's like, yeah, so then I had like 3 days before her wedding, I had her in a
Mhm.
street
I
match
fought her. Yeah.
against me. And I was like, what is wrong with you? You know? Um,
And I made Linda watch.
yeah. And it's stuff like that where it's like, you know, him kissing Trish Stratus in front of his wife,
Mhm.
who's supposed to be like comatose or whatever. It's
Mhm.
like, you know, those funny things where like you go to like a partner and it's like, what would you do in this situation? And it's something that me and my wife always talk about. And she was like,
Sure.
I know what you're gonna ask. The
Hypotheticals.
answer is it would never happen. I
Well,
would
yeah, that's why
never
it's a
allow this to
hypothetical.
happen. And it's crazy to me. I put
I would
down,
never turn into a worm. Yeah,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
I
yeah.
understand.
I it was crazy to me to like, you know, Linda was in this business for years, and it's
As
that
long
thing
as
of
Vince,
like,
effectively.
yeah, and it's that thing with as well as, you know, his daughter and his son, and you hear all of these allegations and stuff, and it's like, you guys you guys did, you guys must have known, right? Like, what was, he couldn't have been that, like, it wasn't, like, you see these text messages they sent, and it's like, how are you just thinking, like, it doesn't matter? Like, I've gotten away with so much that I can just free text these, like, outrageous stuff to people, and I'm not going to get into trouble for this. And,
well, he's gotten away with it so many times.
Yeah.
Look at all the settlements he made.
I guess so. And it's what, like, you know,
it's been reinforced by fact.
It's what in episode 6, when everybody was asking the talking heads, do you think Vince would come back at this point? And they're all like, this was before when Vince was, like, pretty much kicked out completely of the company. And the consensus was, yeah, we could probably see him back. And then it did that cut where...
And then he did come back.
He did come back. But also it did that cut where it showed Stephanie coming to the ring during it, like, when all this stuff started hitting the fan. And she comes out for a SmackDown. And she has, like, the people in the arena chant, "Thank you, Vince," I believe, or something along those lines.
Thank you, Vince, yes.
And I forget, but it made me think of, like, something along the lines that Paul Munchnick was talking about, where it's like, well, these fans, it doesn't matter how much trouble he gets into, because all these fans love him more for it. And, like, that's when it kind of clicked into me, where I was like, my God, I have been feeding this man like this for years, since I was a kid, you know? Like, and, you know, when I was a kid, I didn't think that much into the bad guy on screen is an actual bad guy in real life. I didn't really know.
Nor does anyone else. That's kind of how it works when you're in a cult.
Yeah, because, like, I remember when they started talking about, like, Chris Benoit and, like, the CTE stuff. That was when it was like, I 100% remember all the things that were coming out around that time. That was, like, the most, like, vivid part of, like, because I was, like, I felt like I was too young for the steroid trials when it really came up and everything, and even, like, the Owen stuff when that happened. But, like, Chris Benoit was, like, I was, like, I want to say maybe 10 or 12 when that stuff was coming out. And I was like, that was when I was like, well, when I was a kid, I was like, well, look, WWE's helping out with trying to figure out the CTE stuff. And now looking at it as...
And to be fair, they did.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you can't...
The world is a better place because of the studies they did.
Yeah, and I kind of like the fact that they brought that in, because I think that was, like, a little bit of, like, yeah, you could say it was best for business, you know, because the guy even said, he's like, well, it helps out the business because you're not injuring your athletes, and they're not going to be on the shelf for too long or much longer if you, like, watch their head. And, you know, sponsorships.
It was funny seeing all the CT deniers.
Yeah.
All these years later going, I still don't think it exists.
I think it was...
And it's like, no. It's incredibly well... This is 2 decades later. This research was like 2 decades ago. And it's like, no, by now it is so clearly established. Like, it is a norm that is understood in the scientific community.
I think it's like... one of the more hilarious ones that made me, like, me and my wife, like, laugh out loud about it was Stone Cold. Where, like, he says, he's like, yeah, I don't know if I really believe the whole CTE thing. And then he just puts his head down and looks at the camera, like, as sort of like, did I get my line right? I was like, what is going on? Bro, you got your neck broken during a match. And, like, and then,
and Stone Cold was the guy who talked about having a match he didn't even remember, right?
Yeah, no, that was The Undertaker.
Oh, that was The Undertaker.
During the
like,
streak loss.
Oh, yeah, I was concussed. I don't even remember the match at all.
And then it cuts to Vince, who at this point, you almost had him in, like, a little bit, like, here's his little saving grace, right? You had him where he was like, hey, he was on top of with this like CTE stuff, all this,
Mm-hmm.
that, and the other thing. And then they talk about the streak ending with Undertaker and how he gets concussed like 10 minutes into the match, and how Undertaker's like, yeah, I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
I still to this day can't remember anything in that match. And then it
Mm-hmm.
cuts to Vince going, yeah, I think he had a psychological break when I told him.
Yes, correct.
I
He's
was
like,
like,
I saw the match back, and honestly, they say he got a concussion. I don't see where. I don't see where.
yeah,
It just cuts to the footage of him getting hit on the ground again.
yeah,
It's like, there, Vince, in the edit.
it's
When you
right
watch
there.
back
Yeah.
this episode of the Netflix documentary, watch the edit. That's the moment.
Mm-hmm. And I thought, I was like, you almost had this one saving grace, man, and you just
One of these big
cleared
things
that one
about
out,
Vince.
you know?
Vince and many of Vince's friends do this, right? You know, there was a fair amount about former President Trump as well, where Vince was like, I don't know. If anyone had come to me about this stuff and I knew about it, I would have done something. But I didn't know. I never knew about any of this stuff that was going on behind the scenes. And the fact is, I pretty much believe Vince on that. The problem is, it was his job to know. He was supposed to know. And
Yeah,
I'm sure somewhere in the back of his mind, he went, is something suspicious going on? And then waved it away with, if something was suspicious going on, I'm sure someone would tell me. But also, the last 3 times someone told me, I fired them.
yeah,
But I'm sure this time they'll tell me. And right, so there were like 3 events early on, like with the union and stuff. He's like, oh, I wasn't going to let them get away with that shenanigans. I still think unions are bad for the country. It's like, what?
yeah. And I
Really?
think, and that was,
he he had those, but a lot of the later things, the later scandals, he was able to say truthfully, I'm sure, that he had no idea what was going on because he never asked. Despite him being the top, despite him being in charge and it being his entire job, right? He doesn't, I mean, he did wrestle, he was Vince,
yeah, yeah,
but like his job is to organize these people and to know what's going on in his business. And he's just like, yeah, I had no idea and nobody came to me and therefore I'm blameless. And it's like no one came to you because of the environment that you fostered.
well, yeah, because like again,
You
going back
fostered an
to,
environment where where if they come to you, they just get kneecapped.
yeah, because like it goes back to what Tony Atlas said in episode 1, where he was getting like sexually abused by the booker of the show, and the interviewer was like shocked, and he was like, "You didn't think about like talking to Vince about what was going on backstage?" And he was like, "Talk to Vince? That's his number 2 guy. If I talk to
Yeah.
Vince, I'm fired." You know, and it
Yeah,
was
I'm
like,
gonna get canned.
it's that sort of, it's the same thing with that he sort of, I guess, used as his defense during the steroid trial, where he was like,
Yeah,
I
many
didn't
times.
prescribe, I didn't tell my athletes to do steroids. They did it of their free, able mind. They
Yeah.
did it. And it was like,
Mhm.
yeah, but you must have seen what, like,
Hey,
all
the
this that
the
was going
words
on.
of mobsters and cultists everywhere. It's the same excuse every time by the lead of these organizations. Hey, I didn't know it was one bad actor or 2 bad actors, or maybe it was 47 bad actors.
Mhm.
But don't let them reflect on me just because I built the culture where they're like this,
Mhm.
because I didn't know directly.
Yeah. And I think it really, like, comes ahead during the like whole CTE thing. I think maybe I'd like to think maybe he kind of finally figured it out of like, maybe I should have my wrestlers go through programs and make sure they're not dying at 45
Mhm.
regularly, you know? I think I'd like to
But at the
think,
same time, he got the guy who's like, yeah, if anyone's concussed, pull them off. And then when people were concussed, he was like, no, I don't think so. Keep going.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you can say all that you believe in all these things, but if you don't like follow through on actually doing them in the ring, what's the point?
Yeah. It's really at that point. I mean, not to be like, I blame somebody else other than Vince, but it's something where you see it a couple of times, even still to this day, where like wrestlers get injured in matches, and some of them have that mindset of like, well, yeah, I have a broken arm, but I
You
still
still
have,
got to go out there.
yeah, I still got 10 minutes. I think this was
I can't
brilliant.
afford.
I think this is,
I can't afford to walk away from this match.
yeah, I think this is brilliantly shown during the whole conversation that happened with Owen Hart, where I have no idea
Bret
what the
Hart.
right answer. I mean, like, yeah, do you stop the show?
Not Owen, Bret Hart,
No,
right?
no, Owen's the one that died.
Oh, sorry. You said talked about with Owen as
Oh,
if
yeah,
he
my
were
bad,
with
my
us.
bad. Yeah, yeah. Um, like, what do you do in that scenario where a freak accident happens and, like, yeah, the old mantra is the show must go on, right? And it's like, it's such a I tried to me and my wife had the conversation after that episode of like, I don't even know what the answer like clearly is for
Yeah,
that, you
I
know?
don't blame him for that one either. I know
No.
it's like horrible that it's like, yeah, he continued the show with the blood on the mat and everything. And I'm like, yeah, that was effed up. But in that moment, you have 30 seconds to make that call.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you're
And
gonna pretend you're godly and masterly and you know the perfect thing to say. We're so many years after and I don't know what the perfect thing to say is.
yeah, and it's the thing too that like, maybe you'd like to hope that maybe he didn't really know that if Owen was dead at that moment. I mean, it was like 20 minutes
No, he knew.
after the I'm assuming 20 minutes after the event happened where
They
Jerry
said
Lawler
they
said
did a
on
little,
air.
you know,
Yeah.
everything was black. They did a little intermission and they had a war room and they knew as soon as they got him in the ambulance, they said he was DOA, dead on arrival. And then they went in the war room and had the people come out and say, we don't know his status.
Yeah.
So he knew before he sent people out to say, we don't know. And it was after we don't know that they got the call to continue the show.
Yeah, it's a rough spot to put yourself into. It's that was one
Nobody
of the
knows how
things.
they're gonna react, and like he made a real bad call, but judgment calls like that in the fly of the moment. You know, I try not to put too much weight on them.
Yeah. No, that's one of the I think one of the only things where like I don't blame Vince because I don't even know what I would do in that scenario, you know?
No,
Um
and I think anyone who right now is saying I wouldn't run the show, that's not an answer. That isn't an answer. It's a cop out because
yeah, cuz it's like these
we're
people.
looking for things to do, not things not to do. We can think of 100 things not to do, but
Yeah.
you have to do something.
Cuz
So
the other thing is
it's not a game of elimination. There's a million choices. There's endless choices. It's real life.
because the other thing about it too is like you got to think of it unfortunately from like a business standpoint where it's like, well, people came here to pay money to be here for 3 hours or whatever to
Mhm.
watch to watch a show. And what do you do? Do you go, hey, technical difficulties, what have you, and what refund everybody, like
Well,
that's
you tell them to get in a line and you do a meet and greet with all the wrestlers who were going to perform and let them meet their legends free of charge.
yeah, maybe that was a better
Coming up
situation.
with that in the spur of the moment, on the
Yeah.
other hand,
Yeah,
can't
hindsight
blame nobody.
2020.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a couple years too late
Yeah,
on that call.
yeah.
But that's, yeah, I mean, I can think of some better things to do, but I'm not gonna blame him for that. I would much rather blame him for like him going like, no, I did all these terrible things for the Heat, but I'm not really a person who does those terrible things. And it's like, no, you did those things. You went to these people and you said, hey, wouldn't it be funny if I did this infidelity thing where I just got to make out with all these girls and make them go on all fours on the ground, and
Bark like a
I
dog.
got to grope them
Hmm.
and I could do all these things to them. Wouldn't it be funny if I did this? And a number of them were like, yeah, okay. And some of them were like, no, not okay. And regardless of what they said, you then made them go out there and you did it to them anyways. Like, you can say, oh no, I did that for the character of me. No, you were actually doing it though. This isn't a cartoon. You didn't have them draw a caricature of you groping these women. You went out and groped them. And their consent didn't matter to you because the ones who consented, great. You've consented to do some infidelity on stage. That's kind of bad in its own right, but whatever. Every party is privy to it. But then if they said no, you still did it to them.
Yeah.
It's just horrible.
Because it's one thing.
It means that their opinion never mattered in the first place.
Yeah, because it's the power move of like, I think Trish said it,
where
it was
say
like,
it's during the show, I can do anything I want. It's
yeah,
like no.
I think Trish or one of the talking heads talked about how if you didn't agree with something that was going on creatively with your character or whatever,
and then I lost the belt next week.
Yeah, like Vince would punish you because you didn't agree with what he wanted in the first place.
I don't know if it's related, but it's quite the coincidence.
Yeah. It's
that we went to, because she was willing to do a lot, Trish.
Yeah.
And I believe it was Trish. She was willing to do all these things. It was so far. I mean, all like the
bark
the
like
stuff.
A dog thing.
And then they finally hit her line where she's like, "No, that's too far," and they took her belt away the next week. It's like, yeah, what a coincidence, huh? That's so strange. Is that illegal? No, of course it's not illegal. It's his belt. He can do what he wants with it, even a screw job if he wants. But also, on the other hand, like, this is why you have a culture where people don't tell you there's a problem, right? That's how you create that culture where you have plausible deniability. You just punish anyone who does deny you, right?
Yeah.
Who does have a problem. And then suddenly everybody will just have problems in the background and no one will tell you anything. It's so wild that is how that goes. And then it's also on the side of, I can't remember. I think a couple people said it. Tony Atlas said it, but I think there were a number of people who said, including Vince, where they're like, yeah, we did crazy things back then, with like the underwear matches that looking back we shouldn't have done. Man, I don't know how we got away with that. It was a different time. I have to be clear, because this is very much a trigger point for me, where I'm like, that's not an excuse. Because, and to be clear, I'm not the golden paragon of a man, but one way that I was not so much bullied, but teased quite heavily, hurtfully when I was a kid was because I had a mole, and people would make fun of my mole a lot, but mostly because of Austin Powers. There's a mole guacamole joke thing. People made fun of me a lot for it, and I hated it. I'm miserable. I lashed out in many different ways. And they all did it for fun and games. And they're like, oh, looking back, it's messed up. But isn't it funny? It was funny at the time. No. Ask the victim if it was funny at the time. Ask the person who was the butt of it. Why don't you ask all, the gay people in the early 2000s if it was funny?
Yeah.
Because
it's definitely...
it's weird that the aggressors always think it was funny at the time. As for I don't know how we got away with it. You didn't, because it's not the past.
Yeah.
Time is all connected, past, present, and future. Vince McMahon is being investigated on criminal charges. He got sued so many times. He got ousted from his company. That is comeuppance. That is the consequence of actions he did long ago. So for every wrestler and every person who's thinking back on a moment going, I don't know how I got away with it, the real thing to say is you didn't get away with it. You've got away with it so far.
Yeah.
You got away with it.
And it's like, far. It was that part I think it was during the Attitude, they really tried to hit on the fact of like, yeah, you can't do this stuff that we're doing back then, now. And it's like, yeah, you can sort of blame how the world was back then. But I think overall, we've all learned from being that extreme, I guess you could say, with how everything was. And nowadays, the reason why you don't see that stuff is because people are getting hurt, and people, when feelings are hurt, we're all people.
Getting abused.
Yeah, and it's like, you got to stop this. And luckily, I guess enough, it was like sort of, business wise is the only way that you can affect change, I guess, because
There was a line, I don't think it was Vince who said it, but maybe it was Bruce who said it, where he goes, "Yeah, we were doing all this stuff, but really, who's the real monster? The person who was doing it, or everybody who's cheering
yeah,
for it?"
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's one of those moments where I just have the El Dorado meme in the back of my head, where Miguel and Tulio look at each other and they go, "Both, both, both."
yeah, yeah,
Right? It's like,
yeah,
yeah, both.
yeah.
Both
Because
is
I
the
think I
answer.
think
It's not
Vince,
a it's not a it's a false dichotomy, right? It's not a zero-sum game. You can't have a problem. It's like, look, if are we the problem or is someone else the problem? No, you can all be the problem.
yeah, I think
Everybody can be the problem, including me. We can all be involved in a problem together. That's how problems work.
yeah,
It's not
because
mutually exclusive.
I think that like also Vince like sort of went up with that of going, yeah, oh, you know, you could just shut us off. You don't have to watch us and all this, that, and the other thing. And then
Yeah, but
like
other people did.
I feel like Shawn Michaels said, yeah, you know, at the time I was trying to be edgy, but now having a daughter, yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff that I did then that I would not suggest to do. And it's like there's somebody who at least is actively looking back, because I mean, my
Yeah,
God,
has a little bit of perspective.
yeah, because like my God, you hear the stories about how Sean was a real dick back in the day,
Mhm.
and it's nice to see at least his public facing figure. It
Portrayed in this.
Yeah, he seems like, yeah, he's really trying to go be past that and change in a way that's more more accurate to what times are now, um yeah. uh I, what else do you want to go through, Arno?
I mean, what else is there to say? This is the thing. Is Vince McMahon a horrible person? Yes, that's my answer. Yes.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, you're an outsider and you don't know. And I'm like, no, you can know things as an outsider.
Yeah.
You absolutely can. I can't know everything. I don't know Vince personally. I don't know how he would treat me, but I do base the world on evidence, not my own personal. I know a lot of people in this series like to throw their personal in there of, well, if someone was kind to me, they're not that bad. But I like to use more objective measurements. I like to gather testimony from a series of people and learn these things and come to the conclusion, yeah, he's very bad. What right do I have to judge? None. But that's why we're on a podcast and not on the news. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
he's horrible person, and he has all of his justifications. I really don't think any of them count. I think every one of them is a logical fallacy of some kind. I'm pretty sure.
Hmm.
They all check out somewhere like that. All of them are certainly easily diffused by myself.
Hmm.
Um,
I think
of that's not, go read the words of Dr. King. I think Martin Luther King Jr. He said it a lot better than me. All these things I said now about how you treat other people, about people being kind to you and mean to others, about having to know things because you're the one in charge. It's all from Dr. King, honestly. I just go read things he said. He was really smart. Talking about a man we lost way too early. Could have been alive today if it weren't for tragedy. You know, just go read things he said.
I think it's I posed the question earlier of like, what how do you take this man's legacy? And as somebody who effectively grew up with his product, um I always had this conversation with you about like, I don't really know how to take all this, because like, unfortunately or fortunately enough, I don't know, like, he he built part of my childhood, like I
Yeah.
remember watching wrestling as a kid and connecting with so many of my friends with this thing that he created, and to have him be exactly how he was on screen, off screen, is it's always bad to hear when you have like a hero. Not to say that I view McMahon a hero, but like to have somebody, that is a part of your childhood, and then you go through, and you find out the real stories about them, and you're
We're in
like, man,
cancel culture. We learn
yeah,
this stuff all the time.
yeah, and it's hard to go back and watch all that stuff. And I think, if I were posed that question that they asked at the end of their interviews of what is Vince McMahon's legacy going to be, I think it's going to be a legacy of asterisks. Because, yes, like it or not, he built this business to be what it is today. But asterisks, he hurt a lot of people in the way of doing that, you know? And
I think, and this is where I give this documentary the most credit that can be given, the highest accolade I can give for any piece of media. Because, like I said, the problem I had was with the subject material. I found it dry and not very interesting. But the way that it was edited was great. Highest accolade I can give is this. They did not try and make it simple, because it's not simple. They told you the truth, as much as everyone who was interviewed there wants to say otherwise. They told you the truth, that Vince, a big shocker, is a human being. And human beings do all sorts of good and bad things. You can pretend it's not true, but it is. Everybody has bad things that they've done. This bad? I hope not. Boy, I hope not. But people do good and bad. It's the way they are. And I don't think it is a matter of good cancels bad. I think if you do something really horrible in life, let's say you kill someone, say it's a murder, I don't think you can ever make up for that murder. I don't think any amount of good will ever make up for the murder you did, because I don't think it's a tally system. You just get to keep them both. It's how it is. You do good, you do bad. They're both a part of you. They're inseparable. It's who you are. And it's not about equaling the scales. It's about accepting that humans are complicated. Legacies are complicated. They don't fit into pithy one statements or one sentence statements that many rich and famous and powerful people would like you to believe that they can be. He did great things, Vince. I think that a lot of the wrestling community is fantastic. Pro wrestling, with all the fans and everything it provides, this fantasy that it brings alive is amazing. I mean, we wouldn't have DWRPG, the game we're building, without it. All of this stuff is great. You want to talk about things that, if you want to say, well, creative designs, they don't matter. That's such an argument I'd love to fight you on giving people relief, but let's say it were true that just the creative works don't matter. He gave lots of people jobs. He gave lots of people lots of money to do what they love, to be a part of something bigger than themselves. He gave people purpose. He also forwarded that CT research, the research on concussions, to be clear, because no other sports, right? And, Vince never looked at pro wrestling as a sport. I don't really think it is, but it's physical. No sport wanted to back that research. No sport wanted they went, if you're an athlete in our sport, you can't be involved in the CT research. We won't let you, because we want to deny that concussions are a thing. And they fought it so hard, and it was Vince and the WWE, or I think it was the Federation at the time, who helped allow this research to happen, which revolutionized our understanding of concussions, not just in wrestling, everywhere in the world. In repeated trauma to the head. This is why we know after your second concussion, it's so much worse than the first one. It's because of this research. That's world changing. But you don't get to ignore the fact that he was mean to everyone, who worked under him. That he was cruel to people he didn't think mattered. If you were a moneymaker, if you were part of his direct family, sure, he was great to you. But if you were just some showrunner, if you were just some intern, if you were just, a woman who was part of the lesser division, no, he was very cruel to you, sometimes even abusive. that he did all these terrible things. All both of these things can be true. He can leave behind a lot of good, and also leave behind a lot of bad, a lot of people who are scarred, a lot of people who won't be here anymore because of things he's done. I don't know. He's human. The rest of us are too. Shocking revelation.
Yeah, and I think, I guess I'm glad at least maybe he's gonna pay for all the bad stuff that he's been doing, and hopefully,
Yeah, maybe. We'll see.
I'm of the opinion, wrestling doesn't need him anymore. As the ending of the documentary kind of pointed out, that we've been without Vince McMahon for a little bit as of taping that documentary. And, we're seeing this big upflow, this uptick of viewers watching wrestling now. And it seems like, maybe we'll never be as popular as we were back in the Attitude, but it is definitely coming to a time where I feel like wrestling is becoming more and more popular every week almost, and I think that's without Vince. So I think that,
True, it's without Vince, but it's also because of him.
yeah, yeah,
I don't have any more thoughts on the matter.
yeah. That's I think that's all I got to talk about this man. What is this? An hour? We get an hour.
That's an hour
in
long.
this?
Thank you for if you made it all the way to our hour long thing. This is just us rambling about stuff. We do this sometimes completely off schedule, but more on schedule. We also play the Definitive Wrestling RPG, which both of us are working together to design. If you liked hearing what we have to say here, join our Discord or our Patreon. Get involved. You can probably, we're so small, you can probably talk to us directly if you so wished. Plenty of people do. You could probably play Definitive Wrestling RPG with us. And one of the benefits is, in Definitive Wrestling RPG, you don't have to deal with Vince McMahon.